I walked into my boss's office on a Monday morning and walked out with nothing. 18 years leading the engineering team, gone in less than 10 minutes. Daniel, the new VP, didn't even blink when he told me I was too expensive. He leaned back in his leather chair, smirking as he delivered the line he'd probably rehearsed in front of a mirror. "We can get 3 junior engineers for your salary." Vanessa from HR sat beside him, arms folded, pretending to look sympathetic. Then came the knife twist. "Nothing personal, Jake. Just cost-cutting." He made it sound like he was doing me a favor, trimming fat off a budget sheet, not cutting out the backbone of the entire department. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I nodded once, said I understood, wished them both a good day, and walked out. That was it. No scene, no fight. Just silence. Back at my desk, I packed methodically. Family photo, coffee mug my son made in high school, a cactus that had somehow survived 17 years under fluorescent lighting. Around me, younger employees stole nervous glances, then quickly looked away, as if my misfortune might be contagious. Some of them had been hired straight out of college and trained by me. They were good kids, but they didn't know what they didn't know. None of them understood the older architecture I had built, the custom software I'd written, the buried administrative controls only I knew how to navigate. I carried my box past rows of monitors, down the hall, through the glass doors I'd walked through every day for nearly 2 decades. Daniel stepped out of his office to watch me go. No handshake. No thank you. Just making sure I was really gone. In the parking lot, I set the box on the passenger seat of my car and sat for a long moment, staring at the building. 12 stories of glass and steel, the place where I'd spent most of my adult life. My badge, the one I'd surrendered minutes earlier, had been renewed 16 times. Now it was worthless plastic. I started the engine and drove home. The strangest thing was how quiet it felt, like the air itself was waiting. Andrea, my wife, met me at the door. She didn't ask questions, just read the look on my face. She made coffee, placed it beside me in my home office, and left me alone. After 19 years together, she knew when I needed space. I sat there, staring at the framed certificates on the wall, the reminders of projects I'd led, crises I'd solved, systems I'd saved. They thought I'd walk away with nothing. They thought I'd fade quietly into the background, just another middle-aged man downsized for the sake of efficiency. They didn't know me. Because here's the thing. I never raise my voice. I never start fights. But I never leave things unfinished. And the systems Daniel had just taken from me, they weren't just lines of code. They were my fingerprints, woven through every process, every database, every security protocol. For 17 years, I hadn't just worked at Meridian Technologies. I had become its nervous system. And now they had ripped me out, assuming the body would keep functioning. It wouldn't. And Daniel's panic calls would begin sooner than he ever imagined. The morning after I was fired, I woke without an alarm for the first time in years. No meetings to prepare for, no commute across town, no endless line of tickets waiting in the queue. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, pressing down on you. Andrea placed a cup of coffee beside me, kissed my shoulder, and left for work. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. I sat in my home office, staring at the box of items I'd carried out of Meridian the day before. A coffee mug, a picture frame, a cactus. 17 years of my life reduced to trinkets that could fit in the passenger seat of a car. For most people, that might have been the end of it. But I'm not most people. I've always been methodical, careful, quiet. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a small flash drive, one of several I'd kept over the years. Company policy was clear, no off-site storage of data. But long ago, when the legal team needed an audit system for tracking insider threats, I'd insisted on creating backups. They signed off on it, then forgot about it. I didn't forget. Quiet men never do. I plugged the drive into my personal laptop and waited. Thousands of files appeared, internal emails, archived meeting notes, system logs, and financial records that most employees would never see. As I scrolled, a familiar pattern jumped out. Transfers to a vendor named Apex Solutions Group. I'd noticed it before, small payments buried in the noise of legitimate expenses. But now, with time to focus, the pattern was clear. The amounts had grown steadily over 18 months, adding up to nearly $2 million. I dug deeper, tracing approval chains, cross-referencing access logs. The trail led to the CFO, Brian Wilcox. A quick search told me Apex Solutions was a shell, nothing more than A.P.O. box and a phone number. Registered to a man named Thomas Wilcox, Brian's brother-in-law. I leaned back in my chair and let the realization settle. They hadn't fired me because I was too expensive. They fired me because I was the only one who might have noticed. The only one who had the experience, the memory, the persistence to connect the dots. Daniel, the new VP, wasn't saving money. He was cleaning house, making sure the one man who could expose them was out of the picture. I didn't feel angry. Not yet. Anger is messy. No, what I felt was focus. A cold, deliberate clarity, the kind that sharpens everything around you. They thought they'd cut me out quietly. But they forgot something. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Quiet means watching, recording, preparing. The first call came that afternoon. Daniel's number flashed on my phone. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was tight, rehearsed. Jake, we need to discuss your email immediately. Call me back. I hadn't sent him an email. Not yet. That's when I knew the cracks were already forming. They were nervous. And nervous men make mistakes. I closed my laptop and wrote 3 words in my notebook. Freeze. Track. Respond. The same process I'd followed for every system breach I'd ever handled. Only this time, the system wasn't software. It was Meridian Technologies. And the breach wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the top. Wednesday morning, I sat in my car across the street from Meridian's headquarters. The same building where I had given nearly 2 decades of my life. The place where Daniel had told me I was too expensive. Through the glass facade, I could see the silhouettes of employees rushing to the elevators, balancing coffee cups and laptops. Their lives moved forward as if nothing had changed. But something had. On the passenger seat was my laptop, logged into an email account I had created years ago for penetration testing. It wasn't listed in the company directory, but it looked like an internal address. Invisible to most, but perfectly functional. At exactly 9:15 a.m., I drafted a short message to Daniel. The subject line read, Financial Irregularities. Urgent review needed. The body of the email contained just enough detail to unsettle him. A summary of the Apex transactions, stripped of anything that revealed how much I really knew. I left out the family connection. I wanted to see how he would react when he realized someone had spotted the trail. Then I hit send. By 9:45, my phone buzzed. Daniel's number again. His voice on the voicemail was sharp, almost frantic. Jake, we need to talk about this immediately. Call me back. I didn't. I closed my phone and waited. At 10:30, another message appeared. This time from Vanessa in HR. Her tone was colder, rehearsed. Mr. Wilson, we've received concerning communication from you that potentially violates your separation agreement. Please cease all contact with Meridian employees. That made me smile. I hadn't signed a separation agreement. They were bluffing, already trying to wall me off, silence me before the fire spread. But it was too late. Once panic sets in, it doesn't stop. It spreads. At noon, I went to the bank, opened a safe deposit box, and pulled out another drive. This one contained older files, backups of backups, records even I had nearly forgotten I kept. On it were security protocols I had written years ago, documents that showed who had accessed which systems and when. The timestamps lined up perfectly. 18 months ago, right when the Apex payments began, Brian Wilcox had requested expanded permissions. His fingerprints were all over it. Back home, I checked my phone again. 3 missed calls. Daniel, Vanessa, and one more name I hadn't expected so soon. Jason Phillips, the consultant. He was already moving into my old office, taking over the department I had built from the ground up. Now he was calling me directly. The message was short. Jake, I think you're making a mistake. Let's meet. Off the record. I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I wrote another line in my notebook beneath the first 3 words. Pressure. Because I knew something they didn't. Systems don't fail all at once. They fracture slowly, pressure building until the breaking point. Daniel thought he had removed the weak link by firing me. But what he didn't understand was simple. I wasn't the weak link. I was the system. And he had just declared war on his own foundation. The next morning, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and my notebook open on the table. Andrea had already left for work. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that sharpens thought. On the page in front of me were 4 words: freeze, track, respond, pressure. I circled the last one. That was the stage we were in now. Pressure had to build, and I would be the one applying it. I powered up my laptop and opened the files again. The pattern of payments to Apex was unmistakable. Inflated invoices, duplicate authorizations, approval chains that bypassed normal protocols. But one detail stood out: the timing. Each large transfer aligned perfectly with quarterly reports, the same periods when the board signed off on bonuses. That wasn't coincidence. It was design. I started drafting a report. Not an email this time, but a polished, professional document. Line by line, I laid out the evidence. Dates, amounts, access logs, the business registration linking Apex Solutions to Brian Wilcox's brother-in-law. I didn't editorialize. I didn't speculate. I just presented the facts with the kind of precision I'd built my reputation on. Quiet men don't argue. They document. By noon, I had a 30-page dossier. It wasn't complete yet, but it was enough to create doubt in any boardroom. Enough to make them hesitate before approving another set of bonuses. I printed one copy, sealed it in an envelope, and locked it back in my safe deposit box. Insurance. That afternoon, my phone buzzed again. Another call from Jason Phillips. This time his voice was calm, measured, almost rehearsed. "Jake, we should talk. Face to face. There are things you don't understand." I didn't answer. Instead, I saved the voicemail and noted the timestamp in my notebook. Everything was evidence now. Every word, every move, part of a larger record. At 3 o'clock, I received an email from an old contact, Robert Chun, a semi-retired board member I had worked with years ago during a security overhaul. Back then, he was one of the few who actually read my reports, asked real questions. His message was short: "Heard you left Meridian. Curious timing. Let's talk." That was the opening I needed. Quiet men don't shout. They find the one person still listening. I met him in a park 3 miles from headquarters, away from cameras and offices. He looked older, but sharp as ever. He asked why I reached out. I handed him a sealed envelope with a summary of my findings. I told him I wasn't looking for my job back. I wasn't looking for money. I just wanted the right people to know. He studied me for a long moment before speaking. His words were deliberate. "If what you're telling me is true, the board will have no choice. This could get ugly." I nodded once. Ugly was the point. As I walked back to my car, I thought about Daniel, Brian, and Jason. They believed they had erased me. But what they had really done was cut themselves off from the one man who had been protecting them all along. And without me, the walls would not just crack. They would collapse. Friday morning came bright and cold. I sat on my porch with a fresh cup of coffee, waiting. Not for a call, not for an email, just for the inevitable. When pressure builds, cracks widen. I didn't need to push. All I had to do was watch. At exactly 8 a.m., I triggered the second stage of my plan. A scheduled email delivered itself to every member of Meridian's board. The subject line was simple: "Before you approve Q2 bonuses." Inside was my full report. Dates, figures, company registrations, access logs, and screenshots tying everything together. No commentary. No accusations. Just proof. At 8:17, my phone started buzzing. Unknown numbers. Assistants, board members, executives scrambling. I let them all go to voicemail. At 9 a.m., the board's emergency finance committee was scheduled to meet. By 9:30, the real panic would begin. At 9:32, a text arrived from Stephen, a junior analyst I had mentored for 2 years. His words were rushed, almost breathless. "Police are here. Wilcox and Daniel being questioned in separate rooms." Phillips looked sick. "What did you do?" I didn't answer. Stephen didn't need to know. Not yet. By 10 a.m., my phone rang again. This time, the caller wasn't panicked. It was Meridian's general counsel, Patricia Graves. Her voice was calm, precise, but I could hear the strain underneath. She told me the board needed me to come in immediately to discuss the information I had provided. I said no. Everything they needed was already in the report. And if anything happened to me or my family, additional copies would be sent to federal regulators and 3 news outlets. Silence on the other end. Then, slowly, she said the words I had been waiting for. "The board is taking this extremely seriously. Several executives are already on administrative leave. They would appreciate your cooperation." That afternoon, I drove 20 miles out of town and settled into a diner with spotty Wi-Fi and a clear view of the parking lot. While I ate, news alerts began appearing on local business sites. Meridian Technologies executives under investigation for financial irregularities. No names yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time. By 2 o'clock, my phone rang again. This time it was Robert Chen. His voice carried no hesitation. It's a bloodbath. Brian confessed once we confronted him with the evidence. He's blaming Daniel. Daniel's denying everything. Phillips is pretending he was just a consultant with no knowledge. The board isn't buying it. He paused. We've suspended all three, pending investigation. I listened quietly, letting the words settle. Years of careful work, of quiet preparation, were finally surfacing. They had fired me to silence me. Now their silence was deafening. Before Robert hung up, he added one more line. The board wants to talk to you, Jake. Not about your old job. About something new. I didn't answer right away. I just closed my notebook, wrote a single word at the bottom of the page, and underlined it twice. Control. Because that was what came next. Monday morning, I walked into Meridian's headquarters wearing a suit I hadn't needed in years. The security guard at the front desk, who used to wave me through with a bored glance, stood up straight this time. He printed me a visitor badge with careful hands. Welcome back, Mr. Wilson, he said, his tone edged with something new. Respect. The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent. For 17 years, I had lived in the basement, servers, cables, the humming machinery that never slept. I had never been invited this high before. Now, I was expected. The boardroom was cold and bright, glass walls overlooking the Columbus skyline. 10 board members sat around a polished table. Robert Chen gave me a small nod. At the head of the table sat the interim CEO, a woman promoted from operations after Daniel's suspension. Her expression was cautious, but not hostile. She thanked me for coming, then launched into the situation. The forensic accountants had confirmed nearly $5 million in diverted funds. Multiple executives were implicated. Criminal charges were already being prepared. She said the board was grateful for the information I had provided, and then came the offer. The board wanted me back. Not as a systems analyst. Not as a department head. They wanted me in a new role, Chief Information Security Officer. Full executive privileges. Direct reporting line to the board. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the folder I had brought with me and slid it across the table. Inside were my conditions. Non-negotiable. The CEO scanned the list, her eyebrows rising as she read. Full audit authority across all departments. Independent budget. Veto power on financial technology decisions. Direct access to forensic investigators without executive interference. She said it was unusual. I told her so was embezzling $5 million under everyone's nose. It happened because no one was watching. Now someone would be. The room fell silent. I could hear the faint hum of the city through the glass. I stood, adjusted my jacket, and told them they had until noon. I had other offers. At 11:47, my phone rang. They accepted every condition. That evening, Andrea asked if I was happy. I didn't answer right away. Happiness wasn't the word. What I felt was control. The kind of control that comes from knowing the system now answered to me, not the other way around. I thought back to Daniel's words in that office. We can get 3 junior engineers for your salary. He had smiled when he said it, convinced he was untouchable. Now his career was over, his reputation in ashes, while I had risen higher than he ever imagined. Quiet men don't raise their voices. They don't beg, they don't fight in the open. They build systems. And sometimes, those systems bury the people who underestimated them. This wasn't revenge. This was order. And it was only the beginning. 6 months later, I sat in my new corner office, a view of the Columbus skyline stretching out before me. The desk was clean, uncluttered, unlike the chaotic server rooms I had once lived in. A title plate on the door read Chief Information Security Officer. My name beneath it. The role hadn't existed until I forced it into existence. The company had changed. Executives walked more carefully now. Meetings ran differently. No one dismissed audit reports anymore. No one smirked through cost-cutting presentations. Because everyone knew there was one man in the building who could end careers with a single report. And that man didn't raise his voice. Brian Wilcox had pled guilty to multiple fraud charges. His brother-in-law was under indictment. Daniel was still fighting, claiming ignorance, though the evidence said otherwise. Jason Phillips had vanished for a while, then resurfaced in Brazil, only to be extradited back under fraud charges tied to other companies. Their downfall was slow, public, and humiliating. Meanwhile, I built something new. I promoted Steven, the young analyst I had mentored, to run day-to-day IT operations. He had potential, sharp instincts, but he needed guidance. I gave him the chance Daniel never would have. He thrived. Employees who once whispered about me now stopped by my office with quiet respect. They knew what had happened. They knew I could have destroyed the company, but instead I rebuilt it. Andrea visited me one afternoon, carrying lunch. As we sat together, I noticed how people in the hallway slowed down when they saw her in my office. Not out of curiosity, but out of recognition. They understood now. This wasn't just the quiet systems guy who had been discarded. This was the man who had saved Meridian from itself. But I didn't fool myself. Power wasn't permanent. Respect wasn't permanent. They could try again, someday, to edge me out. But the difference now was simple. I wasn't just a cog in the system. I was the system. Late at night, when the building was empty, I would walk the floors. Server rooms, finance departments, HR offices. I knew their weaknesses better than anyone. I had mapped them, reinforced them, and left quiet tripwires in place. If anyone tried to start another scheme, I would know before they did. Sometimes, I thought back to that Monday morning, sitting across from Daniel as he told me I was too expensive. The smirk on his face, the smug certainty that I would leave quietly, fade into obscurity. He had been half right. I did leave quietly, but I didn't fade. I sharpened. Quiet isn't absence. Quiet is patience. Quiet is preparation. And when it breaks like glass under a hammer. They fired me to erase me. Instead, they created me. And now, every decision, every system, every line of code in this company bore the imprint of my silence. The quiet systems guy had become the most powerful man in the building, and they would never see it coming if I chose to strike again. Autumn settled in, and with it came a new rhythm. 6 months into my role as CISO, the company looked steady on the outside. Headlines about Meridian were no longer filled with scandal. Investors were cautiously optimistic. Employees came to work without whispering about FBI raids or sudden resignations. On the surface, it was calm. But beneath, the memory of what had happened still lingered. I kept my office light low in the evenings, watching the city darken outside. Most executives rushed home after 5, but I stayed. Silence has always been my element. Silence gives space to listen, to observe, to anticipate. And I had learned that the danger never comes from outside first. It always grows from within. One evening, Stephen came to my office, nervous. He mentioned rumors of another shell company surfacing in vendor payments. Small amounts this time, almost invisible. He was worried it might be a copycat scheme. I told him to bring me everything. He did. Within hours, I had mapped out the pattern. Less sophisticated than Apex, but dangerous in a different way. Someone was testing the system, probing for weaknesses, trying to see if the watchdog was asleep. I traced the access logs. This time, it wasn't an executive. It was a mid-level manager in procurement, sloppy enough to leave fingerprints all over the digital trail. I documented it quietly, collected the evidence, and waited. The next board meeting, I slid a folder across the table. The room fell silent as they read. A manager's name, dates, numbers, proof. No drama, no accusations, just facts. They terminated him within the week. It barely made a ripple in the company. That was the difference now. People knew the system had teeth. They knew someone was watching. But influence doesn't stop at the walls of one building. Word spreads. Other firms started calling, asking me to consult, to review their systems, to do for them what I had done for Meridian. At first, I declined. My focus was here. But then I realized something. Control doesn't expand through noise. It expands through quiet reputation. Through stories whispered in boardrooms, warnings passed down in executive corridors. And my story was already traveling. Daniel, stripped of his title, was still trying to claw back credibility. Rumors said he'd been spotted at networking events, offering consulting services, pretending the scandal had been a misunderstanding. But no one was listening. His name was poisoned now. Brian was awaiting sentencing. Jason's trial was making headlines. They had built careers on arrogance and shortcuts. They ended with disgrace. I hadn't lifted my voice once. Sometimes, I drove past the old office building at night, the one where Daniel had fired me. I would sit in the car, watching the lights on the 12th floor, remembering the smirk on his face. He thought he was cutting costs. What he really cut was the fuse on his own career. Quiet doesn't forget. Quiet waits. Quiet builds. And when the time is right, quiet reshapes everything in its image. Inside Meridian, and now far beyond it, my silence carried farther than their loudest boasts ever had. Winter came, and with it, the trials. News outlets splashed the names across every headline. Brian Wilcox, guilty on multiple counts of fraud. Jason Phillips, extradited and facing a decade behind bars. Daniel, still defiant, still claiming ignorance, but now cornered by evidence too detailed to ignore. I didn't watch the proceedings on television. I didn't need to. I already knew the ending. At Meridian, I kept my head down, rebuilding, documenting, reinforcing. The board relied on me now, not just to monitor systems, but to steady the company's reputation. Investors wanted reassurance. Clients wanted guarantees. And quietly, I provided both. My name had become shorthand for stability. The quiet systems guy who saved Meridian. Then came the final call. Not from the board, not from the legal team. This time it was from Daniel himself. Late at night, my phone lit up with his number. I let it ring, then went to voicemail. His voice was hoarse, bitter. He said he knew I had orchestrated it all, that I had set him up, that I had wanted this from the beginning. He called me a snake, a backstabber, a traitor. I saved the message, filed it away with everything else. Another piece of evidence. Not against him. His fate was already sealed, but as a reminder. When people are loud, they reveal themselves. When they are quiet, they control the room. A week later, Robert Chin told me Daniel had finally broken. Facing charges, unable to find work, his network of contacts gone, he had signed a full confession, implicating others in exchange for a lighter sentence. His arrogance had turned to desperation. His smirk had turned to silence. That was the moment I knew it was over. Not just for Daniel, but for all of them. I drove one last time to the headquarters where I'd been fired. Same glass facade, same cold steel, same revolving doors. I stood across the street and watched the building glow in the winter night. People hurried inside, clutching laptops, sipping coffee, rushing to meetings. To them, it was just another workday. But to me, it was proof. They had tried to erase me. They had tried to discard me like outdated hardware. Instead, they had turned me into something untouchable. My silence had outlasted their noise. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't call Daniel or Brian or Jason to tell them they had lost. Quiet doesn't need to announce victory. Quiet takes it and leaves nothing behind. That night, as I sat at my desk in the corner office, I opened my notebook and looked at the first words I had written after the firing. Freeze. Track. Respond. Pressure. Control. I drew a line beneath them and wrote one final word. Closure. Because the system they thought they controlled was now mine. And their downfall was complete. Spring arrived, soft and quiet. The snow melted from the streets of Columbus, and Meridian's glass facade gleamed under the sunlight. To the world, the company looked stronger than ever. The headlines about fraud and betrayal had faded, replaced by talk of recovery, resilience, and record contracts. Executives walked the halls with careful steps, aware that their movements were no longer unchecked. They all knew the reason why. I didn't speak about it. I didn't boast. My power wasn't in words. It was in silence, in the knowledge that nothing happened inside these walls without passing through me. Every system, every transaction, every approval, quietly, invisibly, I was there. Watching, documenting, ready. Daniel was gone. Brian was sentenced. Jason had vanished into the prison system. Their names were whispered like warnings in break rooms, reminders of what happens when arrogance collides with accountability. They had believed noise could shield them. They had believed bravado could blind the truth. But noise always burns out. Silence doesn't. Andrea asked me once if I felt vindicated. I thought about it for a long time before answering. Vindication isn't loud. It doesn't need an audience. It's sitting in a corner office that never existed before you demanded it. It's watching the same board that once ignored your reports now pause at every word you write. It's the respect in people's eyes when they pass you in the hall. Not fear, not pity, but recognition. One evening, long after the building had emptied, I stood by the window and looked down at the city lights. Cars streamed along the highway, glowing like data lines across a circuit board. For the first time in months, I closed my notebook. The words inside were finished. The plan had been executed. The system was stable. But stability isn't permanent. Corruption never truly disappears. It only waits for quiet moments to return. And that's why men like me exist. Not to shout, not to posture, but to build, to guard, to finish what others are too afraid to start. The truth is, I hadn't won by playing Daniel's game, or Brian's, or Jason's. I hadn't won by shouting louder or striking harder. I won by refusing to play at all, by being patient, by being precise, by letting silence carry me farther than arrogance ever could. Some men fight with fists, some with money, some with noise. I fight with systems, with records, with silence. And when silence moves, it doesn't ask for permission. It takes everything. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.